The elevator opened onto the 43rd floor, and Daniel Hale stepped out into the kind of lobby that was designed to make people feel small. Polished concrete floors. 30-foot ceilings. The air had that specific quality of spaces where the heating system was too good controlled, uniform, the temperature of institutional confidence. A reception desk of black marble stood at the far end, staffed by a woman in a headset who did not look up. He was wearing a gray wool coat from 3 winters ago. It was clean. It was ironed. He had pressed it himself that morning, on the small ironing board he kept in the hallway closet, working around Lily, who had been sitting on the bathroom counter eating toast and asking him questions about how elevators worked. The lining was fraying at one cuff, and he had tucked that hand into his pocket. Lily walked beside him, her small fingers wrapped around 2 of his. She was 6 years old and had the compact, self-possessed quality of a child who spent a great deal of time in situations designed for adults. She had her backpack, the one with the faded fox on the front. Faded because she had insisted on carrying it herself since she was 4, and would not hear any argument about it, and inside it were a juice box, a granola bar, a set of colored pencils, a paperback book about horses that she had already read 4 times, and a small stuffed dog named Henderson that she would not have admitted to anyone outside the apartment was in there. She knew the drill. She had been to 3 other evaluation days this winter. She knew how to wait. The lobby was full of men. Daniel noticed them the way a carpenter notices joints, quickly, completely, without apparent interest. Former military, most of them. The posture gave it away more than the physique, that particular distribution of weight that certain training systems produced, a readiness that did not announce itself, but that Daniel could read the way some people read weather. One man near the window had the flat, unhurried gaze of someone who had spent years watching distances. 2 others by the water station were laughing about something, the easy laughter of people who were not nervous. A third sat alone with his forearms resting on his knees, studying the floor in the patient way of someone with experience of waiting rooms that mattered more than this one. There were 23 candidates in the room. Daniel had counted before the elevator doors finished opening. He steered Lily toward the east wall, where a row of chairs faced the room. She made no comment about the men, or the space, or the fact that every face in the room had turned to observe their arrival. She had, at 6, already developed a talent for the studied indifference that her father had spent years perfecting. A man in a fitted charcoal suit appeared from a side corridor. He was perhaps 45, broad-shouldered, with the close-cropped look of someone who had transitioned from a government ID photo into a corporate one without much adjustment in between. His name badge read Ross, Callaway Director of Security. He carried himself with the specific authority of someone who had spent long enough in command roles that authority had become a physical habit rather than an intention. Callaway's gaze moved across the room on its standard survey and snagged on Daniel the way a hook catches a loose thread. "Sir." He did not raise his voice. He did not need to. "This floor is restricted to authorized candidates for the Creston security evaluation." "I know," Daniel said. "I'm one of them." Callaway's expression did not change, exactly, but something behind it shifted, a minor recalibration, the kind a person makes when they have categorized something incorrectly and need a moment to refile it without appearing to do so. He looked at the coat. He looked at the child. He looked at the coat again. "You have your documentation?" Daniel handed over the single sheet. Callaway looked at it for 2 seconds longer than necessary, then handed it back with a motion that communicated nothing about what he had found there. "The waiting area is against the east wall. Children are not permitted past the preliminary phase. She'll wait with me until then." Callaway held Daniel's gaze for a moment, finding nothing in it that he recognized as either deference or defiance, and then moved on. He had a schedule. Lily had already found a chair. She opened her backpack, located the horse book, and set it on her lap with the practiced efficiency of a child who had learned to make herself comfortable in adult spaces without drawing attention to the process. 2 of the candidates glanced at her. One of them, a man with a thick neck and a faded Army Ranger tab on his gym bag, looked away first. Another, younger, watched her for a moment with the expression of someone remembering something, then looked at the ceiling. From the floor above, separated by a pane of tinted glass that could be seen through from one direction only, a woman stood watching. Victoria Kane was 36 years old and ran a company that last year had contracts with 4 federal agencies, 2 foreign embassies, and a Fortune 100 pharmaceutical firm, whose board members she had personally briefed on their threat exposure. She had been the subject of 2 separate threat assessments in the past 18 months, both of which she had read in full and found professionally interesting. She slept, her assistant had privately noted, an average of 5.5 hours a night, and appeared to require no more than that. She had been described, in a profile she had not authorized, as relentlessly analytical, which she had considered accurate but incomplete. She had come up to the observation level to review the preliminary field a habit, nothing more. She did it for every significant hire. She believed you could learn things from a room that a file did not tell you. She noticed Daniel Hale 30 seconds after he entered. She watched the man in the old gray coat settle into a chair beside his daughter. She watched him fold his hands in his lap, without fidgeting. She watched him become still in the particular way that some people could, not the stillness of someone waiting, but of someone who had simply decided to be exactly where they were, with no remainder. The lobby, the other candidates. Calloway's pointed attention, none of it registered in his body as anything requiring a response. The child turned a page. Victoria picked up her phone. Sent a one-line message to Greg, her assistant. Pull his file, and bring it to me before the physical phase starts. Then she went back to watching. The physical evaluation was held in a converted space on the 42nd floor, a room with rubberized flooring and high windows, through which the winter light came in gray and flat, the kind of light that flattened everything and made distances look shorter than they were. Candidates cycled through stations arranged along the perimeter. Pull-ups. Reaction timing. Scenario response. Stress inoculation exercises that amounted, in practice, to standing in the center of a room while 3 people shouted conflicting instructions at you and someone timed how long it took your hands to stop moving. Calloway presided with a clipboard and the neutral expression of someone keeping count of something that mattered to him precisely. The combat assessment was last. It was structured as a controlled engagement, not a real fight, the briefing sheet clarified, but a demonstration of response capability in close-quarters scenarios. The standing partner was a staff evaluator named Marcus Webb, who had the build of someone who had once competed seriously at something and had never entirely stopped. He was not quite smiling, but he had the look of someone who was comfortable with the role, who found something satisfying about being the standard against which other people measured themselves and generally fell short. The first 4 candidates went in sequence. The first performed well, good reflexes, clean mechanics, the fluency of someone who had spent a lot of time drilling. The other 3 were competent in the way that people who have done enough of a thing to be functional but not enough to be fluent are competent. Webb absorbed everything they brought without visible effort. When Daniel's name was called, he handed Lily his coat. She took it without looking up from her book, folded it across her lap, over the book, and continued reading. The man with the Ranger tab on his gym bag watched this exchange and said nothing. "Take your time," Webb said. He had said it to everyone, the same inflection each time, a piece of professional courtesy that contained, for anyone paying attention, the faint suggestion that time was not really something available for taking. Daniel walked to the center of the mat. He stood with his feet shoulder-width apart, arms loose at his sides, weight centered. He did not adopt a fighting stance, which was itself a kind of communication, either confidence or ignorance. And the room, after what it had seen in the parking lot story, had begun to revise its initial estimates. He simply stood there, in the way that a lamppost stands in the street, present, unmoved by the weather around it. Webb moved first. It was a test, a committed but controlled grab, designed to assess how a candidate handled contact and the particular social contract of an engagement they hadn't initiated. Fast, decisive, the kind of entry that ended most evaluations quickly, either by demonstrating the candidate's competence or by eliminating the need for further inquiry. What happened next took approximately 3 seconds and was difficult to describe accurately afterward, because it did not look like what it was. There was no dramatic exchange. There was no visible impact. Webb's forward momentum redirected, the precise term would be redirected, not countered, not absorbed, but redirected, like water finding a different path. And then Webb was on his back on the mat, looking at the ceiling with the expression of someone calculating how they had arrived at their current location. Daniel was standing in almost exactly the same position he had been standing in before, slightly turned, weight-centered, arms at his sides. The room was quiet, not the quiet of people being polite, not the quiet of surprise, which is brief and has a texture to it, a short intake before it resolves. This was the quiet of people whose internal models had just failed to generate a prediction, and who were waiting for their minds to offer a revised one. Webb got up slowly. He was not injured. He stood for a moment, tested his balance in a way that looked casual, and was not, and then looked at Daniel, with a different expression than he had used on anyone else that morning, the expression of a professional encountering something that has recalibrated his reference frame. He made a small note on his own clipboard, not on Calloway's, his own. Calloway cleared his throat. "Efficient," he said. The word was designed to sound like a compliment and function as a diminishment, in the way that certain words can do double duty when spoken with the right flatness. But one demonstration doesn't indicate sustained capability. Anyone can catch someone off balance once. Daniel said nothing. He looked at Calloway with the same equanimity he had been looking at everything all morning. And whatever Calloway had expected to find in the look, self-satisfaction, argument, eagerness for approval was not there. "We'll factor it in," Calloway said. He made another mark. He moved on. In the doorway, Lily had lowered her book a precise 2 inches. She was watching. When she noticed Daniel glance over, she lifted the book back up with a speed that did not entirely conceal the fact that her ears had gone slightly pink. The way they did when she was trying not to show that she was pleased. Victoria Kane read Daniel Hale's personnel file in the time it took her coffee to cool enough to drink. This was not because the file was thin, though it was. It was because the file was wrong in a very specific way that she had learned to recognize, over 4 years of running a security firm, as something other than administrative incompleteness. The documentation was real. Fingerprints matched federal databases. Social Security number confirmed, issued in Ohio, consistent with his stated birthplace. Military service record. Army. 8 years, honorable discharge. No disciplinary notations, no commendations, either which was, in itself, a notation of a kind. The kind of record that resulted from one of two things: genuine, undistinguished service, or the deliberate removal of items that would attract attention. After the military record, a gap of 4 years. Consulting work, self-reported, no named clients. No 1099s accessible in the standard employment databases. No corporate registrations, no published work, no professional affiliations. A gap that was too clean, not empty in the way of someone who had done nothing, but empty in the way of someone whose activities during that period were documented somewhere that required a different kind of access than she had. Then, a 2-year period, where the file contained something she had seen exactly once before. In a contractor review for a client who worked adjacent to federal intelligence, a reference number that pointed to a record, requiring a clearance that was not, to her knowledge, held by anyone in the private sector, without a very specific kind of arrangement. She set the file down. Greg stood near the door with his hands clasped, waiting. He was methodical and unflappable, and had been with her long enough to know that her silences were not invitations for commentary. "Did you request the underlying record on the reference number?" she asked. "Yes." Request was acknowledged and denied. Standard response. Record exists. Access level insufficient. No further information available. Did they log our inquiry? "Yes. Thank you," she said. "That's all." He left. She looked at the file again for a moment, then closed it. She went down to the evaluation floor, not because she had scheduled it, but because she wanted to see him again, with the file's information layered over what her eyes would give her. She arrived during the break between assessment phases. Candidates were at the water station. Calloway was on his phone in the corner, turned 3/4 away from the room, which was a posture she had noticed him adopting more recently, and had not yet formed a complete thought about. Daniel was sitting in the same chair from earlier. Lily had migrated from the chair to the floor beside him, and had set up a small workstation colored pencils, arranged by a system that was legible to no one but herself. A sketchbook opened to a fresh page. She was drawing with the full commitment of a person for whom drawing was not a pastime, but a form of serious inquiry. Victoria had positioned herself at the edge of the room, near the refreshment table, close enough to see the sketchbook's page, without crossing into a radius that would require acknowledgement. The drawing was in crayon. Lily had switched from pencils without any apparent shift in concentration. A tall figure and a small figure, standing in front of a building that had more windows than any building Victoria had seen, but that communicated, large and official, unmistakably. The tall figure's arms were slightly extended from the body, facing outward, oriented toward whatever existed beyond the frame of the page. Below the building, in careful block letters, each one the same size, each one sitting on an invisible baseline that Lily had apparently constructed internally. Daddy protects people. Victoria looked at the drawing for a moment, then at Daniel, who was looking at nothing in particular, at the middle distance between himself and the opposite wall, in the way of someone whose attention was distributed rather than fixed. She returned to her office. She stood at her window for a moment, looking at the city, which was doing what it always did, accumulating, insisting on itself, indifferent to the weather. Then she called Calloway. "Keep him," she said. "Miss Kane, his file has significant gaps. 3 separate periods, where the documentation doesn't meet our standard verification thresholds. I know what his file has. Keep him." She hung up before he could ask her why, which was deliberate. She did not owe Calloway her reasoning. She owed him her decisions. Calloway assigned Daniel to perimeter rotation, the lowest tier of the protection schedule, the part that involved hallways and parking structures and the kind of sustained, unglamorous standing that tested patience more than skill. It was the position they gave to people they were not sure about, or people they wanted to nudge toward departure, without the formality of a conversation. Daniel did not appear to receive this message. He arrived on time each day, not early, not late on time, with the precision of someone who had mapped the commute against every variable and left nothing to weather or optimism. He wore the team's standard issue jacket without alteration. He stood where he was assigned to stand. He did not offer opinions during briefings or volunteer for visibility in ways that drew attention. After 3 days, most of the senior team had stopped noticing him in the way people stop noticing a particular corner of a building they pass through daily, present in the environment, not registered as a feature of it. This was, it turned out, a significant error on their part. The security apparatus at Creston's headquarters was sophisticated in the way that expensive, carefully maintained systems are sophisticated, genuinely capable, thoughtfully designed, and containing, as all such systems do, the specific blind spots generated by the confidence of the people who had built it. Camera coverage was extensive. The monitoring system had been updated 18 months ago. The access protocols had been revised after an external penetration test the previous spring, a test that found 4 vulnerabilities, all of which had been remediated and signed off on. Calloway was proud of it. He had every right to be proud of most of it. Daniel, in his first week, found 11 things. Not all of them were serious. 2 were minor: a camera angle in the east stairwell that created a sightline gap of approximately 4 feet, enough to conceal a person if they knew exactly where it was, and a door alarm on the service level that logged 5 seconds behind, real-time, a discrepancy consistent with an incomplete firmware rollout. Irritants, not vulnerabilities. 3 were moderate: a scheduling pattern in the executive elevator rotation that, observed across enough days, would allow someone to predict arrival windows with useful accuracy. A gap in the visitor credentialing process that opened reliably when the lobby operated with 1 staff member instead of 2, which happened on Tuesday mornings before 10 and Friday afternoons after 4. A fire exit on the 39th floor that the camera system showed as alarmed, but which, when Daniel pressed the bar from the stairwell side while appearing to adjust his earpiece, produced no audible alert in the monitoring room. He waited 90 seconds. Nothing came through. 6 were serious. He wrote those down on a separate sheet and looked at the list and thought about what a pattern of that kind implied. not neglect, which had its own signature, but something that looked more like deliberate selection. Someone who understood the system well enough to know which gaps were useful to leave. He ate half a granola bar at his desk at noon. He did not register being hungry until he had finished it. A veteran on the team named Craig Sauer found him one afternoon in the lower parking structure, standing at the third column from the east entrance, looking at the camera housing above the secondary exit with focused attention. "Anything wrong with it?" Sauer asked. "Probably not," Daniel said. Sauer stood beside him and looked at the camera himself. He was in his early 50s, broad, with the quiet efficiency of movement that came from long experience of situations where excess motion was a liability. He had been on the team 7 years. He recognized the specific quality of Daniel's attention, not routine patrol, but the way of reading a space against its own stated architecture. He recognized the method. He had seen it once before, in a context he rarely mentioned. "Where'd you do your training?" Sauer asked. Daniel met his eyes for a moment. "Here and there." Sauer nodded once, as if this were a complete answer. For him in that moment it was close enough. He went back to his rotation, but he started paying close attention, and his attention was the kind that had been specifically trained to find patterns in apparent routine, and the pattern he was beginning to read in Daniel Hale was one he had encountered before briefly from the other side of a comms channel in a program that did not appear in any public record. It began small. These things always did. In Daniel's experience, the significant ones rarely announced themselves. On a Tuesday in January, Victoria Kane's afternoon schedule, including a site visit to a logistics partner in Arlington, appeared in a trade publication's executive movements column the morning before the visit. The column was a minor industry item, the kind that circulated within a specific professional radius and generated no particular attention from anyone outside it. But the information was accurate to within 30 minutes, and no one on Creston's external communications team had authorized a release. When Daniel checked, no one had even been asked. Callaway attributed it to a leak at the logistics partner's end. Plausible as an explanation. Not the explanation Daniel would have chosen, given the specificity of the timing detail, which was the kind of specificity that came from someone with access to internal scheduling rather than general awareness of executive travel patterns. The following Thursday, Victoria's vehicle was photographed by what appeared to be a freelance news photographer in front of a building she had visited without public announcement. A meeting scheduled the previous afternoon, communicated internally, through a single calendar update visible to 6 people total. 4 on the security team, 2 executive assistants, 2 incidents. Individually, explicable. Together, they constituted a pattern's beginning. And Daniel's threshold for concern was calibrated to beginnings rather than middles. He began logging access timestamps on the team's shared communications channel, the channel where scheduling updates were posted. He was not authorized for direct access to the scheduling system itself. But the channel gave him enough. When updates were posted, when they were read, by whom, and in what sequence. He maintained the log manually, on the secondary phone, in the same format he used for everything else. On a Wednesday afternoon, Lily was in the building's small family room, a space that had been arranged by the HR department after Victoria had, according to Greg, made a statement about the fact that an employee's child should have somewhere to sit that was not a lobby chair. The statement had apparently not been phrased as a suggestion. Lily was doing homework, or performing an adequate simulation of homework, and the receptionist who checked on her every hour seemed satisfied. She was also, as it happened, sitting near the corner of the room where a thin shared wall met the service corridor that ran behind the executive floor's north side. Daniel learned about the phone call later. When Lily mentioned it, the way she mentioned small things she had noticed as a passing observation, offered sideways while doing something else, in the tone of someone reporting a fact, rather than seeking a response. "Someone was on the phone in the hallway for a long time," she said, working on the outline of a horse without looking up. He said the same numbers twice. Like he was making sure the other person wrote them down. "What kind of numbers?" Daniel asked. "Time numbers. Like 4:15, 7:30. And then a date, I think." but I didn't catch all of it. Daniel set down what he was working on. Did you see who it was when they left? No. The door doesn't have a window. And I didn't want to open it because I didn't know if I was allowed. He thought about that for a moment. About the corridor. About who had access to it and when. Good work, Bug, he said. I wasn't trying to listen, she said, slightly defensive. I know. That's why it counts. The incident happened on a Friday afternoon in the Creston parking structure, Level 2, at 17 minutes past 3. Victoria Kane was moving from a meeting with her legal team to her vehicle. The route was standard. The route it always was on Friday afternoons, because standard routes reduced variables, and Calloway believed in reducing variables. The escort was Sauer on the primary, and a second guard at following distance. Daniel was on perimeter rotation, 2 levels below. He was not supposed to be on Level 2. He had moved there 8 minutes earlier, without authorization, without notifying the team channel. The reason he would have given, if asked, was that the pattern of the afternoon felt subtly wrong, not wrong in any way he could have isolated, and named not wrong in any way that would have survived a rational accounting. The rhythm of vehicle movement through the structure was slightly off from what 3 weeks of observation had established as normal. A white cargo van had entered at 3:04 and had not exited in the interval, consistent with a delivery or pickup. Small things. The kind of things that did not add up to a fact, but accumulated into a disposition. And his disposition said, go up 1 level. The van was parked across from the elevator bank, backed in, side door facing the elevators. The doors opened at 3:17, and Victoria stepped out into the gray afternoon light of the structure's 2nd level. The van's side door began to move. What followed was swift, and, to the 2 surveillance cameras that captured it, appeared almost understated. Daniel crossed the distance from his position at the column to the elevator bank in the time it took the van door to open to its halfway point. The man who stepped through that opening found his forward momentum redirected in a way that was clean and, from the footage reviewed afterward in the Federal Liaison's office, almost considered in its application not violent in the way that violence looks on camera, but conclusive. There was a brief interval that the footage could not fully account for. A blur of proximate bodies, and then the man was seated on the concrete floor of the parking level, with the expression of someone whose understanding of the sequence of events had not caught up with its conclusion. 2 other men in the van did not exit. They had seen enough. Sauer had Victoria positioned behind the nearest vehicle, body between her and the van, the way that training and reflex produced the same outcome. Daniel stood in the space between them and the van's open door, his back to Victoria, watching the 2 interior figures with an attention that communicated no particular urgency and a great deal of finality. The men in the van ran their calculation. The door slid closed. The van moved toward the exit ramp at a speed designed to appear unhurried. The entire event, from the moment the elevator doors opened to the moment the van's taillights disappeared up the ramp, lasted 41 seconds. In the elevator on the way back to the main floor, Victoria looked at Daniel. He was facing forward, watching the floor counter descend. His breathing was unchanged. His hands were at his sides. Where were you assigned today? She asked. Level 4, he said. Why were you on Level 2? He considered his answer for a moment. The way he considered most things. The van was in the wrong place. She looked at his profile, the set of his jaw, the stillness of his eyes, tracking the numbers above the door. Where were you trained? She asked. The elevator reached the lobby floor. The mechanism settled. The doors opened onto the marble and the ambient noise of the building's main level. It's a long answer, he said. He stepped out into the lobby and did not look back. She let him go. For a moment she stood in the open elevator, feeling the faint mechanical breath of it, watching him cross the lobby toward the stairwell at the pace of someone with a specific next task. Then she stepped out and went to find Sauer. Because there were things she needed to understand, and Craig Sauer was, she had begun to suspect, one of the people who could help her understand them. Craig Sauer had been with Creston for 7 years. Before Creston, he had spent 3 years doing contract work that he did not discuss at office social events, contracts of the kind that were referenced by number rather than client name, and that were, in the parlance of the industry, relationship-dependent meaning they existed because of who he had worked with and what he had established, and they would have evaporated if either of those things had changed. Before that, a long federal career across 3 agencies and 2 decades, most of which was not in any file accessible to civilian inquiry. He had a good memory for names and a better one for techniques. Techniques, in his experience, were more distinctive than names. They persisted, they accumulated. They reflected choices made at the level of instinct rather than performance. He found Daniel in the equipment room on a Tuesday evening, the building mostly empty. Daniel inventorying comms gear with the methodical attention he brought to everything. "I want to ask you something," Sauer said. Daniel kept inventorying. He did not tell Sauer to ask or not to ask. He simply continued. "2 years ago," Sauer said, "I did a 4-week intensive, private contract, off-book. 7 of us. The instructor we were given worked in shadow. We never saw his face, never got a name, comms only. But the program he ran," Sauer paused, chose a word, "was unlike anything I encountered in 22 years of government work." The situational reading alone, the way he framed distance and response timing. "I've never seen it anywhere else." Daniel did not look up from the inventory sheet. "I recognize the footwork," Sauer said. "From the parking structure, the way you moved to the van. The arrest technique you used on the first man, the way you positioned when the other 2 were still inside the angle." He stopped talking. The room was quiet. Daniel set down the clipboard. He looked at Sauer for the first time since the conversation started. "How many of you were there?" Daniel asked. 7. "Why?" "I had 4 groups," Daniel said. 7, 8, and 6, and 9. "I don't know which group you were in." Sauer was quiet for a long moment. "My partner, who's been in this industry for 15 years, said that program changed the way he thinks about protection work," Sauer said. "He said the instructor had to have been somewhere very specific for a very long time." "He wasn't wrong," Daniel said. "What happened? Why did you stop?" Daniel picked up the clipboard again. "My wife died," he said. "April, 2.5 years ago. Lily was 3. Someone had to be home." Sauer did not say he was sorry. He understood that Daniel had not said it as an invitation for condolence. He had said it as a fact. The kind that explained everything and needed no commentary. They finished the inventory in silence. It was a comfortable silence. That night, Sauer sent Victoria Kane a message. It was 11 words. "You need to know who you actually have working perimeter rotation." Victoria read the message at 11:42 at night, sitting at her kitchen counter with a glass of water and a stack of quarterly reports she had been meaning to finish for a week. She read it 3 times. Then she called Sauer. He told her what he knew. It took 8 minutes. After, she sat with the phone in her hand for a while, looking at the middle distance. She had known Calloway for 4 years. She had promoted him to the director role herself, 18 months ago, based on a record that was clean and a manner that was authoritative and an instinct hers that had apparently been wrong. She did not spend time on regret. She spent time on evidence. In the morning, she asked Daniel to come to her office. Not through Calloway. Directly. Through Greg. He arrived at 7:45. Lily was at school. He looked slightly less tired than he usually did, which she had come to recognize as the version of him that had slept more than 5 hours. She showed him Sauer's message. He read it once. "What do you know?" she asked. He put the phone down and pulled out his own, the one with the time-stamped notes, the photographs, the log observations. He handed it to her and talked her through what he had found over the preceding 3 weeks. He was concise. He used precise times and specific observations. He did not speculate beyond what the data supported. When he finished, she was quiet for a moment. "Why didn't you report this to Calloway immediately?" "Because the pattern suggested the problem might be internal. I needed more before I could say who." "Do you know who now?" He looked at her steadily. "The scheduling access timestamps tell part of it. The service corridor call that Lily overheard. I've cross-referenced the time with the building's internal phone logs, which I pulled from the facilities system. There's a call from that corridor extension at exactly that time. The extension is registered to the security office, specifically to Calloway's secondary line. Victoria looked at him for a long moment. What's the next step? Document it formally. Preserve the logs. And you need to know there's something planned. The pattern of the information leaks over the past 3 weeks follows a build frequency, specificity, timing. Someone's been preparing a detailed picture of your movements. That's not surveillance for its own sake. That's target construction. She absorbed this without visible reaction. When? The governor's infrastructure gala. 3 days from now. It's your highest profile public appearance of the quarter. It's already widely scheduled, and the security brief for it went through Calloway's office last week. She stood. What do you need? Authority to rebrief the team directly. And Calloway not in the loop from this point forward. She thought for exactly 2 seconds. Done, she said. The governor's infrastructure gala was held at the Meridian Center, a venue of glass and steel on the waterfront that on most nights hosted corporate dinners and nonprofit benefits, and the kind of events where the catering was excellent and the politics were ambient. On this particular Thursday evening, it hosted 400 guests, 12 members of the press, and a security team that had been quietly reoriented over the preceding 72 hours by a man who had never formally been put in charge of it. Calloway did not know about the reorientation. He believed he was running the evening's detail as planned. He had submitted his standard brief. He had his earpiece. He had positioned his people where he always positioned them. What he did not know was that 6 of those people were operating on a second set of instructions. Daniel ran the secondary channel from a position near the service corridor on the venue's ground floor. He was not in a tuxedo. He was in staff blacks, indistinguishable from the catering team. He had a radio and an earpiece and the floor plan that he had memorized 3 days earlier and corrected at 2 points where the original documentation was wrong. At 8:47, the first indicator appeared. A catering subcontractor who had not been on the original staffing manifest entered through the loading dock with a credential that passed the scanner but did not match any name on the event's vendor list. On Calloway's channel, nothing. On Daniel's channel, a quiet confirmation from the guard at the dock. Credential cleared. Name not on list. Holding for secondary check. Hold him, Daniel said. Don't make it visible. By 9:15 they had identified 3 others. Calloway's move, when it came, was almost elegant. He reported a credible threat on the exterior perimeter, credible enough to require moving Victoria's position, which would have required her to pass through the service corridor on the east side of the building. The corridor where, as it happened, 2 of the 3 unverified contractors had been directed by someone on Calloway's team to stand by for a equipment check. Sauer was with Victoria. He heard Calloway's radio call and recognized it immediately for what it was. He keyed his secondary channel. East Corridor. Now, Daniel was already moving. What followed was neither brief nor clean, but it was contained. The 2 contractors in the East Corridor were secured. The third, who had been moving toward the main hall, was intercepted by a guard Daniel had repositioned an hour earlier. Calloway, on becoming aware that the secondary channel existed and that it had outmaneuvered him at every point, attempted to exit through the loading dock. There were 2 guards at the loading dock. Daniel had put them there at 8 o'clock. The building's head of external security, a federal liaison present for the governor's detail, was brought into the situation at 9:41. The documentation Daniel had assembled over the past 3 weeks was transferred to him on an encrypted drive. By 10:15, Victoria Kane was back in the main hall, speaking with the governor's chief of staff, holding a glass of sparkling water she had not yet drunk. Sauer was 4 feet away. Daniel was in the service corridor, watching the floor plan update on his phone as his team cleared positions one by one. At 10:22, Sauer's voice came through the earpiece. All clear. Daniel lowered his phone. He leaned his shoulder against the wall and breathed once. Slowly, through the gap in the service door, he could see the edge of the main hall. The chandeliers. 400 people, having a Thursday evening, the governor's chief of staff laughing at something Victoria had said. He straightened up and went to help with the post-event documentation. The federal inquiry that followed Calloway's arrest was not brief, and it was not quiet, and it involved several other parties whose names did not appear in any of the public reporting. Daniel was interviewed 3 times by 2 different investigators. He gave the same answers each time, in the same order, with the same level of specificity, because they were the same facts, and because in his experience, the most reliable sign that someone was constructing a story, rather than recounting, one was small variations in detail over repeated tellings. The inquiry lasted 6 weeks. Creston Security restructured its executive protection protocols from the ground up, with external oversight. An independent firm conducted a full audit of the physical security architecture, and when they submitted their report, 3 of the 11 items they had flagged had already been quietly corrected. The lead auditor noted in a memo that circulated internally without much resolution, by methods that were not consistent with standard remediation procedures and that were, in her professional assessment, frankly more effective than the approaches she would have recommended. She could not determine who had done the work, because it was not documented in any work order, and the timestamp logs for the relevant systems showed only routine access events. She noted this and moved on, because the work was good and there were other things to attend to. No one asked Daniel about this directly. He did not raise it. Victoria offered him the director of security position on a Tuesday morning in late February, in her office. In the particular flat light of a winter that was beginning cautiously, tentatively, to consider the possibility of ending. The city through the window was the color of old pewter. He was quiet for a moment before answering. Not the quiet of hesitation, but the quiet of someone completing a thought before speaking it. "I appreciate it," he said. "I need to decline." She had considered this possibility. She was a person who considered possibilities. She had not assumed she knew his answer, which was one of the things that distinguished her from most of the people she dealt with. "Tell me why. The director role is 70, 80 hours a week. It has to be, if you're going to do it right. I'm not in a position to do that. Because of Lily." Because of Lily, she held his gaze for a moment. The city continued to exist outside the window, indifferent to the conversation, doing what cities did. What would work? A consulting arrangement. "I assess your protocols. Train your protection team on a quarterly schedule. Stay available for high-risk periods, hours that let me be home for school pickup most days and dinner most nights." She was quiet for a beat. "That's a significant reduction from what I'm offering you." "I know what I'm offering you," he said. "It's the same capability, differently structured. The outcomes would be comparable." She almost smiled. Not quite, but close enough that he registered it. "I'll have Greg draft something this week." He stood. He did not thank her effusively. He nodded, in the way he did most things without surplus, without performance, as if the conversation had concluded at exactly the point it needed to conclude, and there was nothing left worth adding to it. "One more thing," she said. Before he reached the door, he stopped and waited, which was itself a form of courtesy, the kind that did not draw attention to itself. The auditors, the ones who found the 11 items. 3 of them had already been fixed before they arrived. There was no work order. No one on the current team has claimed it. He did not say anything. Were those the 3 easiest ones? He considered the question in the same way he considered everything. Briefly, but completely. "The 3 most urgent," he said, and left. The door closed behind him with the quiet precision of a well-maintained mechanism, doing exactly what it was designed to do. In the weeks that followed, Lily grew fond of the office in a way that was gradual and then suddenly settled, the way children establish themselves in places, not by announcement, but by accumulation. She had her corner in the family room, with a specific chair that had been repositioned at a specific angle, and that, if moved, she moved back without comment. She had a routine. She had, apparently, strong opinions about the potted plant near the reception desk, a ficus that had been in that corner for 3 years without incident, which she informed Greg one Wednesday afternoon was not getting sufficient light and would eventually communicate its displeasure in ways that would be difficult to overlook. Greg moved the plant to a different window that afternoon and said nothing about it to anyone. The plant, for what it was worth, appeared to respond well. On a Friday in March, Victoria stopped by the family room on her way out of the building. She had been stopping by more often on Fridays, a habit that had developed without deliberate intention in the way that some habits did. Lily was at the low table, with a multiplication worksheet, working through it with the specific focused displeasure of someone who found the material beneath her capacities, but had not yet found a way to make that objection count as an argument. Victoria sat down in the chair across from her, setting her bag at her feet. "How's the math?" "Fine," Lily said, which did not mean fine but meant, "I have decided to complete this and not be happy about it." She looked up. "How was your day?" The question was direct and interested in the way of a child who had not yet learned that inquiring about another person's day was primarily a social formality rather than a request for information. "Busy," Victoria said. "But finished now." Lily considered this. Daddy says busy is usually just another word for not organized. Victoria thought about her calendar. She thought about the 17 items on her standing Tuesday agenda and the 3 standing commitments she had declined to delegate, and the way the weeks between January and March had felt like a single continuous effort in different fonts. "He might be right," she said. Lily accepted this and returned to the worksheet. Daniel appeared in the doorway a few minutes later. At the time, he always appeared on Fridays, having completed whatever the last item of his consulting work was, with the same absence of surplus that characterized everything he did. He had his coat over his arm, the same gray wool coat, though the fraying at one cuff had been repaired at some point without announcement. He looked at Lily, who had already begun packing her backpack with the systematic efficiency that was entirely her own and also, somehow, entirely his. Victoria stood. For a moment, the 3 of them occupied the same room in the late afternoon light, which had that particular pale gold quality that late winter produced when the sky was clear and the sun had reached the angle where it came through windows at the right height to be generous. There was nothing that needed saying. The room was settled and quiet. Not the quiet of absence, but the quiet of sufficiency, which was a different thing and rarer. "Good night," Victoria said. "Good night," Daniel said. Lily waved without fully looking up, already moving toward the door, already in the calculation of the evening what she wanted for dinner. Whether the horse book had a chapter she had not read since Tuesday, whether Henderson needed to be relocated from the bottom of the backpack to the top. She was 3 steps into the hallway before either adult had moved. Daniel followed her. Victoria stood at the window after they had gone. The city was doing its early March thing, the light still short, but changed in quality from February. Something in it that was not quite warmth but was the memory of warmth, or the suggestion of it. She thought, a room can be entirely ordinary and, at the same time, exactly right. She had not known this until recently. She filed it as something worth keeping. Then she picked up her bag and turned off the light and went home.